I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and you are listening to the special podcast Christmas edition of For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you and your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, and your coworkers, and the birds, and the mammals, and the fish, and the plants, and pretty much everybody and everything, because we're all together on this wonderful planet that we call Earth. And as I mentioned, this is the special Christmas edition, because we were not live in studio this week. Instead, we're going to just be doing the podcast, and we're going to, of course, be broadcasting our show on our wonderful WGRN in Columbus. And this show is going to be a clip show. We're going to be reviewing the year. And as always, when I go back over the year, I'm just amazed at the interviews we've managed to get, the guests we've managed to land, the issues we've managed to cover. You know, we're like 3 or 4 months ahead of the major media on some of these important issues. And so I thought that we would start with one that we did last February. It was originally aired February 13th, but this one is very topical because I'm actually broadcasting from Western New York, just outside of Buffalo, because that's where my family is. And yes, we got here just before the huge storm hit, and we weathered that huge storm, and we didn't lose power. We never lost power at this house, but people all around us did. And it's been the storm was incredible, and the snow, I'm from Western New York, so I'm used to blowing and drifting snow, but this snow was, because it was being blown into place by 70-mile-an-hour winds. When we went to try to dig out yesterday, Christmas Day, it was like concrete. It was really, really dense, hard snow, and it was very difficult to shovel. And that reminded me of our interview with Dr. Cohen from MIT back there on February 13th of 2022. And he is going to explain to us a little bit about why, even though we're supposedly in global warming, why this is actually causing winters to become harsher. And I think it was a good interview, and he, having studied it his whole life, he can explain it better than me. So here's our interview with Dr. Cohen. Hello, and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your title?
My name is Judah Cohen. I'm Director of Seasonal Forecasting at Atmospheric Environmental Research of Veris Business. and I also have an adjunct position in the civil and environmental engineering at MIT.
Okay, well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. The reason I contacted you was there's a very interesting study that you folks published that suggests that global warming can lead to colder winters for us here in the United States. And I thought that was a pretty timely thing to talk about since we're still having kind of a cold snap here in Ohio. Could you sort of run down how this is possible?
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's warming in the Arctic. So the Arctic is warming 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the globe. But our argument is saying that warming in the Arctic can counterintuitively lead to cooler winter weather, more severe winter weather, so that includes both cold snaps and disruptive snowfalls across the mid-latitudes, and that includes, the United States east of the Rockies. Now, how that Arctic changes can lead to more severe winter weather is a bit complicated, but it involves please, if anything sounds like it's getting too technical, pull me back, rein me in. But
okay.
The mechanism, it involves the polar vortex. So the polar vortex is certainly a phenomena that's being used more often in the media. So hopefully the public's getting more comfortable with it. And the polar vortex is an area of low pressure that sits right over the North Pole. And it has this west-east circulation involved with it. So there's a fast-flowing river or ribbon of air that flows around the polar vortex from west to east. And it's also important to remember that the polar vortex is in the stratosphere. So it's not, we live in the troposphere, the planes fly in the troposphere, all the weather occurs in the troposphere. But above that layer, the tropospheric layer, there's a stratosphere. So it's like 10 to 15 miles above the Earth's surface. And in its typical state, the polar vortex, so the low pressure is, the center of the polar vortex right over the North Pole. You have this, kind of jet of air that's circulating around it, and it confines all the cold air of the really cold air of the northern hemisphere close to the Arctic.
Okay,
so that kind of...
that polar vortex, I'm assuming, given the word vortex, is like a circle that just literally normally circles the pole?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a circulation that has a very circular shape to it. So on the north side of that circulation is where the cold air is, and on the south of that circulation is milder air.
Okay.
So that circulation, that kind of jet, fast-flowing ribbon or river of air, kind of acts as a boundary or fence. So, it keeps the cold air on the north side, and on the south side, it tends to be warmer. That is the typical state. It's a very stable state of the polar vortex, and it also tends to be very strong. So you can think of the polar vortex as a spinning top, and when it's in a very fast, quiet rotation, it just kind of sits there and has a very, and it keeps all the, kind of cold air close to it. Just like with the, also the Winter Olympics this week. So it's like the figure skater. When the figure skater pulls the arms in close to the chest, it rotates much faster. And that's the same thing with a typical polar vortex. That all the cold air is close to it when it's spinning very fast.
So what's happening now?
So that's a typical thing. So where has Arctic change, fit into this? We've shown now, in multiple papers that when the Arctic change can cause a change in the wave dynamics of the atmosphere. So the jet stream. So the jet stream is the river of air that's in the troposphere that carries with it all the weather systems. But so when you have small waves in the jet stream, it doesn't give off much energy, just like an ocean wave. The smaller the wave, less energy. As the waves get bigger in the ocean, you have more energy. Everybody, experiences that, when they're sitting, kind of standing in the surf. And same thing with the waves in the atmosphere. So when you have smaller waves, is of less energy, has bigger waves, gives off more energy. And we're saying that the Arctic change amplifies the waves in the atmosphere, and so then these waves give off more energy. So they just don't propagate horizontally like an ocean wave, but they also propagate vertically. So that energy then moves from the troposphere to the stratosphere. Now, again, if you think of that polar vortex as a fast spinning, quiet rotation top, and then you start banging on it, like, if you had this top spinning there very nicely, and then you kind of hit it with your hand or bounce off of something, it would start to wobble, it would start to meander, it's no longer sitting in one spot, but it's kind of just moving all over the place. Same thing happens with the polar vortex. So Arctic change kind of gives the chain of events here. Arctic change leads to larger amplitude, bigger waves. Those waves give off more energy. That energy then kind of bangs more and more on the polar vortex top. And before where it had the circulation was quite fast around it from west to east, separating the warm and the cold air. Now that polar vortex is moving off from the North Pole, so it tends to move towards either Eurasia or towards North America. The circulation becomes more expansive, so it extends into more southerly latitude. So that cold air now is moving south of its normal position, and and then you get these more cold air outbreaks. And if you have colder air, you're more like places that maybe typically might see more rain start to see now more snow. And that's so that kind of, hopefully I wasn't too complicated my explanation, but that's kind of a very simple way what is going on.
And that was a very nice interview. Our next interview, we go off to talk with Colette Atkins of the Center for Biological Diversity. And the reason I wanted to be sure to include this clip was because this is some rare good news for environmentalists. We're talking about the wolf Endangered Species Act status being restored, and it's really a great thing when the courts finally recognize scientific reality and do the right thing, and that's what happened here. So here's our interview with Colette Atkins. All right, hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Once again, could you please share with us your name and your title?
My name is Colette Atkins. I'm the Carnivore Conservation Director and a senior attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity.
Okay, great. And I am calling you on this week and having you on the show because there's a cause to celebrate, is there not?
Yes, I'm just so very excited that a federal judge restored protections to gray wolves across most of the country. Places like the Great Lakes and the West Coast states and the Southern Rockies, northeastern United States all have protections under the Endangered Species Act again.
That's amazing. So we might actually have hope of seeing a wolf someday right here in Ohio then.
Yeah, maybe so. It sure would be amazing. And wolves every once in a while do make their way through Ohio, but, no breeding populations, but they can travel, hundreds of miles, and I do hope someday that even there in Ohio you might have wolves.
Yeah, I think that would be amazing to see a wolf. And when people hear about the possibility of seeing wolves, sometimes they get intimidated or even scared. But there's no reason for people to be afraid of wolves, is there?
Oh, there sure isn't. I mean, what a treat to be able to see a wolf in the wild, and for sure they're afraid of people. They're elusive and shy animals that I live in Minnesota, which has had one of the biggest populations of wolves since they were even first listed, and I've only once ever seen a wolf in Minnesota, and I've tried my hardest. So it's just a big treat. You should be very happy if you run across one.
All right, I'll be keeping my eyes open now. So this restoration of Endangered Species Act status means that now the Fish and Wildlife Service has to actually figure out how they can restore wolves to their whole range, right? Eventually.
Well, I sure hope that the Fish and Wildlife Service takes this court ruling as a sign that they finally do need to really work on restoring wolves to additional places, but I am a bit skeptical. I mean, the Fish and Wildlife Service has been just trying to prematurely remove protections for wolves, for a couple decades now, and they've just lost repeatedly in the courts, and yet they just go back and remove protections again. But I'll try to be hopeful here and hope that this puts them on the right path.
All right. And so, is this one of the biggest victories you've seen in your career so far?
It really is. I mean, this is one of those wins where there are, immediate on-the-ground implications. In areas where people could shoot wolves dead, they're fully protected now. And, if I look back at what happened in the last year under state management, for example, in Wisconsin, where more than 200 wolves were killed in 3 days, and that's illegal now. Wolves can only be killed in a defense of human life, except for in Minnesota, where they have threatened status, which is just a little bit less because they're more abundant here in Minnesota where I live. And here, wolves that are confirmed to be attacking livestock can be killed by government agents. But other than that, no hunting, no trapping, no shooting by private landowners.
Oh, that's wonderful. So now this covers 44 out of the 50 states, right? There's still a few states that don't have to have them as endangered.
Yeah, the rule that was challenged in this court case where we had the win, that rule didn't affect wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains region. So like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming are the core states there, around Yellowstone National Park, because that area was listed, or it was delisted back in 2011 through a congressional rider. So those wolves still are under state management. Although one of the things that my organization and others are working for is to restate protections in that area as well.
And that was our little clip of Colette's interview. Always nice to hear from her and our friends over at the Center for Biological Diversity. Now, this next clip, though, is not nearly so fun. In fact, I have an update on this story that I'll tell you after the clip is over. But the reason this one was important is because this is the kind of story that is sort of behind a lot of environmental issues, meaning the results of this court decision are going to affect the ability of people who care about the environment to challenge bad environmental policies. And a lot of people, most people don't even know that this court battle happened because it wasn't really reported on much in the mainstream media. And yet it's going to have a tremendous impact. And so this is the sort of story that we like to cover here on For a Green Future because we like you folks to know what's going on. So here's our interview with David Sly from Wild, Virginia.
Sure. My name is Dave Sly, and I work for a group called Wild, Virginia. And, of course, our mission is to protect and restore the environment throughout Virginia, meaning our forest and our streams and the places that folks enjoy and depend on, and the things that are necessary for us to keep a sustainable future for our area.
Yeah, a worthy goal. And you do have a beautiful state. I've gone through it a number of times.
Yeah.
There's a lot worth protecting there in Virginia.
Absolutely. we're in the Appalachian chain, and some of our areas have some of the greatest biodiversity in the country, and there are lots of internationally important species and habitats here. So a lot to protect.
Yeah. All right. So I was calling you to interview about a specific lawsuit that you guys are involved in. That's called Wild Virginia versus White House Council on Economic Quality, and it concerns NEPA. Could you please, give us just a quick review of what NEPA is, and B, talk about the specific situation that prompted this lawsuit?
Sure. Well, NEPA is short for the National Environmental Policy Act. It was adopted kind of in the heyday of environmental laws back in 1970, and is really a foundational law in our environmental history. What it requires, people are usually familiar with the term environmental impact statement, and that's one part of NEPA that in some cases federal agencies are required to do an environmental impact statement. There are other parts of the law, but essentially what it does is it says that when the federal government is going to make decisions about our environment and our health, that it has to do a thorough analysis, and it has to explain its reasoning as to why, what will happen predictably if they do this action. And especially important, it lets the public be part of the process. Well, not only lets it, but requires that the public be part of the process, so that we get all that information and we can weigh in on these decisions. A really important part of it is that folks in their own areas know the situation there. They know about their own streams and forests and things. And so not only their opinions about what's the best thing to do to manage these areas, but their knowledge about what exists there and what's important and how to protect it is a big part of it. So in hundreds and hundreds of circumstances, NEPA plays a role. It makes sure that agencies' decisions are looked at in an environmental context, and that supposedly all the right factors are considered. And it's been incredibly important for citizens who want to stop bad projects, who want to improve plans that have been laid out there. And we, Wild Virginia, and lots of other groups use it on pretty much a daily basis to have an impact on how our environment is treated.
Right. So the Trump administration in the last few months, weakened NEPA. I mean, he really just sort of took an axe to parts of it. In what ways did he weaken it? How serious an attack on NEPA was what the Trumps did?
Yeah, well, again, this is a long story. It started way back in mid-2018 when they first said, we're going to make some changes here, or we plan to. And it's been kind of working its way through the regulatory and legal system since then. Some of the really important parts that they, were wanting to do away with. First of all, there are lots of projects that they wanted to put in a category where they didn't have to go through that kind of process of analysis and public input. There's something they call categorical exclusions, and as that implies, if a project fell within a certain category, we don't necessarily get any notice that it's going on. We don't get a full appraisal of the environmental cost, and we don't get to weigh in. And that, there may be small, isolated circumstances where that kind of thing is okay, but they wanted to do it, and the final rule that they adopted allows it in many thousands of cases that could do great damage. They also, under the new rule, which was adopted, by the way, in 2020, they also did things like say you don't have to look at the cumulative impacts of this project that you're proposing in the context of whatever else is happening in that environment. And obviously that's crucial. You can't look at one little piece of an environment and what you're doing with it and ignore all of the other parts of that. So those are just a couple of pieces. I think we laid out originally something like 10 or 12 significant problems with that proposed rule. And again, it became final in 2020 under the Trump administration.
Man, so really serious degradations to the environment are possible under this rule change. Now, you guys appealed that, and the federal judge dismissed your appeal, claiming that you don't have standing, which I guess he thought you guys didn't breathe air or drink water or something like that. Are you? So now you're appealing the dismissal. So, how's that going? How's the appeal coming along? And B, are you disappointed that the Biden administration has essentially picked up where the Trump administration left off and is defending the dismissal?
Yeah. Well, first of all, his ruling that we didn't have standing really hinged more on the idea that we haven't suffered damage yet. the kind of concerns, the kind of damage that could be done wasn't imminent or wasn't being done already in his judgment, in his ruling. And so that was the basis. There was really no argument as to whether we as citizens, as the public, had real concerns. It was just that it wasn't as urgent as he thought it needed to be to give us legal standing. Now, part of our argument against that is that we won't even sometimes know when specific cases come up, as I described. So we had to look ahead and try to head off those possible deficiencies instead of waiting for bad problems to pop up. So his ruling came out last summer, and we soon after that appealed his ruling to the Court of Appeals, and I think we now have finished the briefing of that case. So both sides have made their arguments in writing, and we anticipate a court hearing sometime this fall. So obviously these things take a while to work through the process. We also, when we filed the case with him, is we asked him to stay the original rule change, which meant that until the whole case was heard, the old rules would stay into effect, the rules that have been there since the early 70s. And he denied that also. So, unfortunately, the newer rules, the Trump rules, are in effect right now, except that the administration did do a revision, an amendment of their own, the Biden administration. So they did go in and they fixed some things, a few things, but they didn't go far enough. And so that's why we're continuing the case. And so I would say that the Biden administration's record on this is mixed. They have admitted that there were big problems with the Trump rule. They have gone forward with some corrections, but at the same time, they haven't been willing to go all the way. And so that's disappointing that we have to continue this legal fight to try to make sure, it's all fixed.
And that is the story where I have the promised update. Unfortunately, that hearing that he was talking about in the future, this episode was back in the spring of 2022. That hearing actually happened this past October. And what happened on December 22nd, when everybody was focused on Christmas and the oncoming storm, the appeals court threw out their lawsuit, so they lost. And I am going to get in touch with them next year and find out if they're going to appeal the loss to the Supreme Court. But once again, that court refused to consider any of the actual issues involved here, and again just said that there's no jurisdiction here, that there's no legal authority to even consider these questions, when the obvious question that arises is, well, who would have legal authority? I mean, how are we supposed to, as citizens, be involved in our government when a fundamental change in the rules of the game gets made like this? And so, that basically it's a flimsy legal excuse for not hearing the argument and for not ruling on the question at hand. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to have done to the environment that the appeals court did there. So I'm sorry to have to bring you that update. And like I said, we'll keep following this story, and we'll get in touch with these folks next year and see if they're going to pursue this to the Supreme Court. But even if they do that, unfortunately, it doesn't look good for the earth. So, the judge made a great decision in terms of preserving their own career, but in terms of preserving the planet, it's a horrible, horrible decision. All right, next we get to go to our advertisers and sponsors. Yes, because even in this podcast version of For Green Future, we are still very dependent on our advertisers and patrons. For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. There's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, which is simply wcparks.org. And they have an app. You can download that. It's called WC Parks. Just search for that on an app store. And then, of course, they're on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. That's the Wood County Park District. And For Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. And there they found our Patreon page. They just searched for a Green Future. And on our page, they were able to choose a membership level that matched their budget, or they were able to do a custom membership level. So either way, whatever matches your budget, you're able to just choose that amount to every month take a little bit out of your account, and every month it puts a little bit into our account, and that's how we can manage to bring you this show. So thank you so much for our patrons and our advertisers, and that's how we've been able to bring you this show. Clip, if you were listening to the show as a regular listener, you might remember that was the show where on my way into the show, the Route 75 was blocked by a semi-trailer that crashed and blocked all the northbound lanes. And I had to do the entire program from my van because I had gotten stuck on I-75, and then I was driving through the city of Toledo to pick Rebecca up. And it was just an interesting challenge. It was a little bit of an adventure. And, I've had a lot of adventures in connection with this show. And this next clip, this is from my program where this is one of my most popular programs of the year in terms of the number of downloads of our podcast. And this is a little bit about when I took a cruise down to the Caribbean and looked at that whole experience sort of from an environmentalist point of view. So here's my next clip. But there is just a couple things I wanted to talk about on this trip. One of the things that happened to me, I ended up getting sent to the wrong terminal to ride my boat down here, to catch my boat. Those of you who are familiar with the Port of Miami know that there's terminals A through G where these cruise ships load. And I was actually sent to Terminal A, but my boat actually left from Terminal G. And so what ended up happening was I ended up having to walk all the way from A to G, which is well over a mile. And one of the things that I got from that was that I couldn't have gotten otherwise. So in a way, I guess I'm grateful this happened. A sense of the real scale of these ships, that they're enormous. It's hard to put into words just how tiny you feel when you're walking past one on the outside, which interestingly is an experience you don't actually get anymore, because now all these ships are loaded from these sort of interior gangplanks. So you just like go into a room and then you walk across the bridge and then you're on the ship, and then you don't really get that sense from being inside the ship because you're just too close to it. But these things are amazing. They're just incredible uses of resources. And it was also another incredible use of resources. While we were in the port, we spent some hours there before we pulled away from the dock. And I saw quite a few of these mega yachts, these mega yachts that they're talking about, that this is what people who are ultra wealthy get. This is how you know you've become someone who's ultra wealthy, when you can afford one of these 100-foot long yachts that have disco floors and bowling alleys, and there were dozens of them that I saw pulling in and out of the harbor. And so one of them actually even had the stereotypical party going with, dozens of girls in bikinis and guys sitting around on lounge chairs drinking with music that was so loud, you carried up onto our ship. And I couldn't help but thinking, this is what supposedly, this is kind of like the pinnacle of our economic system. I mean, this is kind of what it's all for, in that you can only afford a mega yacht if you've achieved the economic goals that we're all supposed to be striving for in this system, that we're all trying to make tons of money. And how do you know when you've made tons of money? How do you know when you've made enough money that you can say, I'm a winner? It's when you can afford one of these mega yachts. And I can't help but thinking, it's not really worth it, because a lot of these people make their money by degrading the environment, either by harvesting resources, raw materials like lumber, or digging up the ground for mines, or ruining areas in order to get fossil fuels out of them. That's how a lot of these people make enough money to make a mega yacht, to afford to buy a mega yacht. And it just struck home for me again that it's not really worth it. I mean, what we're doing when we do something like cut down a forest, and somebody does get enough money, they can buy the mega yacht with the forest. But getting that person wealthier impoverishes everybody, because that forest was providing benefit to all of us, no matter where it was. I mean, you can be a forest on another continent, and it's still benefiting everyone on the planet by cleaning the air, by taking CO2 out and putting oxygen in, and making sure the water that's flowing down into the oceans that we all share, that I'm out on, making sure that water is clean and not filled with silt and not eroding the land. But of course, I also realized the, I guess you might call it hypocrisy, of making that observation from the deck of a cruise ship, which, big as mega yachts are, they are toys compared to these cruise ships. I mean, you can say, that something is like 400 feet long, but you can't really appreciate how long they are until you walk the length of them, which, as I said, is something that no longer happens. You don't even get to see the ship anymore because you get off at the road, and then they take you into the terminal building, and then you get through that narrow little gangplank. But one other thing that did happen to me on this trip, and that is that I woke up in my cabin at like 4:30 in the morning when it was still dark out, and I went out on my little balcony, and seeing the ocean under the moonlight with nothing as far as the eye could see, that kind of put things in scale again. I mean, as huge as these ships are in terms of human scale, it's almost unimaginable how big they are. Once they're out in the open ocean, once you see horizon to horizon nothing but ocean and moonlight and stars, again, our huge ships are actually just these tiny little blips in history and on the ocean. And it's just something to, this has been a very interesting trip in terms of feeling about scale and feeling, just exactly what are we humans doing with all this stuff that we're creating and destroying. And I came across, next to my hotel, there was an interesting historical platter, a historical marker, and it had the title Julia Tuttle, the Mother of Miami. And it turns out this woman, Julia Tuttle, was originally from Cleveland, and in 1891 she bought some land on the Miami River, and she had in mind what has actually happened since then. In other words, she from the very beginning had the plan of sort of wiping out the natural flora and fauna and replacing it with city. And in fact, there's a quote here: "It is the dream of my life that this wilderness be turned into a prosperous country," which, the scale again of Miami is just incredible. I mean, high rises as far as the eye could see. I took the free little rail car that goes, electric powered rail car that goes around the city, the downtown area, and it's just, building after building, millions of people, and it is, some of it is prosperous. Actually, Miami is a very weird mix of prosperous, like you'll have these multi-million-dollar buildings and stores, and then one block over, everything's closed down and the homeless people are lining the streets. And so it's both prosperous and it's also in decline at the same time. But what has happened is that the natural abundance of the ecosystems there, the swamp, the place where the fresh water comes and meets the salt water, which is literally the most productive kind of an ecosystem on the planet, because that's where fish spawn and that's where all kinds of different critters can live in the swamps and grow. All that's gone. It's all covered in concrete now. The Miami River has concrete sides all the way out to the ocean, which is great for the mega yachts going back and forth. But in a large way, we've all lost, because when that was a productive, healthy ecosystem, again, that was benefiting everyone on the planet. And one other thing to remember is that Miami is doomed. The oceans are rising, the sea level's going up. I mean, for a little while, Miami's going to become the Venice of the United States of America, but that city's going under. There's no way we can build seawalls high enough, no way we can run enough pumps. Eventually, the rising sea level is going to overwhelm Miami, which just makes the whole incredible boom and real estate prices in this city that much harder to imagine or understand. But again, it's all sort of based on this fantasy that people can get so wealthy they can afford mega yachts, and somehow that's a desirable thing for everybody. And I don't know. I've just been doing a lot of thinking on this trip. Yep. Yeah, and that was one of the clips from my trip down to the Caribbean. Did a lot of thinking on that trip, and hopefully one of the purposes of this show is to get everybody doing some thinking about how we can keep this society going, how we can prevent that whole burnout and collapse thing that usually happens to big civilizations like ours. And another person that's fighting to help us maintain this wonderful society, and make it sustainable, is Sandy Bin with Waterkeepers. And my interview with her about CAFOs is actually the most downloaded podcast of 2022 on my program. So I thought it'd be appropriate to do a clip of her program, and here it is.
This is Lake Erie Waterkeeper, and I'm Sandy Bin, the Waterkeeper.
Okay, Sandy, thanks for coming on. And could you just remind us a little bit about what Waterkeepers do, what Waterkeeper is?
We're advocates. Well, we're part of the licensed member of the International Waterkeeper Alliance. There's over 300 of us worldwide and representing different watersheds, and we're about drinkable, fishable, swimmable waters.
All right. And I asked you on today because you guys are doing something kind of special this afternoon. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we're sponsoring the Erie Situation documentary at the Maumee Theater. There's a meet and greet at 4:30, and the documentary is at 5:30, and it'll be followed by a discussion. And it is free. A donation by Plastic Oceans, who paid for the program as requested. If you go to Erie Situation, there's a registration online that you can still do, or you can walk in and do the registration there when you come. It's a very balanced documentary that gives all aspects of ag and health and being on the lake and the algae problem and the CAFOs. And researchers. So it's got a good mix of people. It's really, really well done. It won an award at the Cleveland Film Festival. So we hope you'll come.
Okay, so that's Erie Situation, you say?
Right. The name of it is Erie Situation.
That's EERIE.
ERIE, and then Situation, SITUATION.
Okay. And you mentioned it talks about CAFOs. Could you just remind us what CAFOs are?
CAFOs are confined animal feeding operations. In the late 80s and 90s in the United States, we switched from pasturing and a lot of farmers raising animals to confining them in large numbers in smaller spaces. And that's created a lot of problems for the manure management and the air. And so it has a water quality impact, and it's one of the major sources of the harmful algae that was causing the phosphorus that's causing the harmful algae.
Aha. Yeah, I've heard that a CAFO operation can put as much sewage, animal waste, into the environment as a small city, like the size of Bowling Green.
Oh, bigger than Bowling Green, actually. We've got one CAFO that has, I think, 7,000 dairy cows. That's like 140,000 people. So that's like, what, Bowling Green's about population 25. I don't know exactly
30,
what the population is. Yeah, so it's, it's 5 times that. So
yeah, wow.
They produce a lot of sewage.
And they don't have, sewage treatment plants attached to them. I mean, they've got...
None of it. It's all land applied. That's the disgusting part. And because they're so close together, they put it in lagoons. So when they put it in the fields, it's in a liquid form. And, that goes down to the drain tiles and out into the streams and into the river and into the lake more easily. And so, yeah, all the cow and pig manure is now put into containment areas, lagoons, or under the buildings. And it has liquid in with it so they can apply it to the fields. Otherwise, there's just too many chunks to put in too close a space. That should give us an idea that they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's one
or
of the...
spread it out further and carry it further. I mean, you can put manure on the ground as a fertilizer if you spread it as you would as a commercial fertilizer. But we're allowed to put about 5 times more manure on the fields with phosphorus than is needed than a commercial fertilizer application would have.
Uh-huh. And I suppose it could also be composted. That could...
I think composting is more difficult, yeah. I think eventually they're going to have to treat it in some form, or either, I mean, it's not economical to truck it very far from within a couple miles of the facility, so the money, the cost of it becomes prohibitive. But it is a waste, and I think we need to think of it as a waste, and it needs to be managed differently than the waste of the animals when they were pastured and spread throughout the landscape. And we've had like a 88% increase in the number of animal units, according to the Ohio Department of Agriculture, in the Maumee watershed between 2002 and 2017. Today, I mean, right now we're having 16,000. I mean, they just keep adding more and more and more to the watershed while they're paying to reduce it. They're encouraging it to be added. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and that really kind of talks about our addiction to meat in this culture. I mean, we need to reduce.
Yeah, and I don't know that we're going to conquer. You know, a lot of people would like people to switch to, you know, non-meat products. You know, I respect that, and that's fine. But at this point in time, and it's not us, I mean, I think about a 30% or even more of the hogs that are raised in this country are exported, and the primary country they're exported to is China. And when you think about the fact that it's cheaper to raise a hog in the U.S. than China, it raises a huge flag as to why is that. And the answer ends up being that in China you have to treat the manure for E. coli, and they limit the number of animals in a watershed. In the U.S., there is no limit to the number of animals in a watershed. We have zero treatment here. And, of course, the other factor that makes it cheaper here is the grain that feeds the animals is cheaper in the U.S. than Canada as well. Or, I'm sorry, China as well.
Wow, you don't usually think of China as having more restrictive environmental laws.
So we're now behind China in environmental laws. Great, that's special.
Wow. Okay. Well,
yeah, that's really, it's hard to even think that could be the case. I mean, for me, that's like mind-boggling. And most people look at me like I'm nuts, but I have the documentation. And, of course, China's very closed about what they do or don't share. But why would China care if, you know, they bought the hogs here and ruined our waters here, you know, so that they save money and can make more of a profit? You know, the Chinese government helped to buy Smithfield, the largest pork producer in the United States, back in 2008, because the economics here are so much better.
The economics are better, but the environmental laws are worse.
Yeah. And that was our interview. I hope you enjoyed it. In that interview, Sandy mentioned the movie The Eerie Situation, which was a very good documentary about the CAFOs and the problems with the algae blooms that we have in Lake Erie. And that was one of 3 movies that we kind of talked about through the year. Another one was Elemental, which was an excellent documentary about how the practice of deforesting to prevent forest fires actually doesn't work. It actually makes forest fires worse. And so that was a good one if you want to go back, and if you're looking for episodes to go back and revisit, that's a cool one. And of course, there was the movie Radioactive: The Women of 3 Mile Island, which we both did a show on, and which I drove to New York City to watch. And we did 2 shows on that excellent documentary that documented the health effects of the radiation released from the 3 Mile Island accident on the people who live downwind, the downwinders. So it's been a great year, and I'm just going to go out here with a clip from our Thanksgiving interview with Philip Yenyo, because I think that's appropriate since I'm so grateful for all of you. So that's it for 2022. We will be back in 2023 and the January 1st episode live again in studio. So this is Joe DeMare signing off. I'm calling, of course, we're talking today because this Thursday is Thanksgiving, and
Yep.
I just kind of like to talk to you about the role of thankfulness in Native American culture. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's for our people in our culture. It's not a 1 day a year situation. We are grateful for all kinds of things every single day. Like this morning, I woke up, and before my feet hit the bed, I thank Great Spirit for giving me another day to walk upon Unchimaka, Mother Earth. And it's a privilege that we're given every single day. So for me, it's an everyday thing.
Right. Yeah.
And I know it's like that for a lot of people, a lot of Native people.
Right. I mean, it's kind of a breakthrough that Western culture, the U.S. culture, has actually sort of taken at least a day, because our culture doesn't really emphasize thankfulness that much. It's focus is more on sort of working hard and fighting the world and tearing what you need away from the wilderness and the world, and it's not that healthy an attitude.
No, I think also it makes you more aware, and it makes you more humble. I think that is a big thing right there. To be humble, to have humility, to practice it. And a lot of people nowadays, they don't even have an idea of what that means or what that is. So it keeps us basically, it's a way for us to keep ourselves in check, to keep our ego and everything in check.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!